Let's go beyond the connection. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really interesting guest with just a variety of things in your background, Scott, that just make you somebody that I just want to talk to and learn from. Scott Reid, you are the Director of the National Vice President of Technology Strategy and Sales at Radiology Partners. It's a very interesting set of responsibilities that I want to talk to you a little bit about some more. But what we're going to talk about today is just knowing when to start over. When's that the best choice? To hit that restart button, pull the plug on and just let it restart all over again. So we're going to get into that in a big way. But before we do, I'd love to have you share a little bit about your background, not only technology and sales, how that came together, but you've got actually a really big athletic background, a lot of success at the collegiate level. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that because you've got a coaching philosophy that I think is important to bring into all of this as well.
Sure, Steve. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to participate on your podcast, and certainly have enjoyed getting to know you and having conversations in advance of doing this. It's a pleasure to get acquainted with your audience. And so, I am more senior in my professional life, but certainly as a youth, relied on athletics as an escape from my routine. And I really found my ability to be successful athletically was a place where I could be at peace, quite honestly, in terms of some other things that were going on personally in my life. And I really relied on my coaches as mentors and as people that I could look up to and receive guidance from. And really, it taught me a lot, each one of them, and taught me a lot, not only on how to compete and be successful athletically, but also how to work with teams, how to work with peers, how to trust one another and listen to one another. And I'll tell you a story, and this is a story I didn't tell you yet, but in my high school career as a senior, I was a defensive back, one of the leaders on the team, and had a great relationship with the defensive coordinator. And he wanted to play a young man in our defensive backfield that I just didn't feel we trusted as a team like someone else. And I went up to him on the sidelines during a game and I said, "Coach, I need to tell you something. We don't trust that player to play the way you want us all to play. And I really believe you should put in this other player." And he listened to me. That was really impactful.
You know what? If we don't have a foundation of trust, I got to tell you something. When my wife and I got married, one of the things that we said to each other is that's the most important thing we can have in our marriage is trust. If we lose that in our marriage, what else do we have? I'm going to transition us over because one of the things you didn't say also is that was Division III football, but you only lost 5 games in your career and you won a national championship, and the team went on to win 4 straight national championships, undefeated for 4 years in a row. So when you say that you learned a lot about coaching and teamwork and that you bring that into the business world, I think your experience put you as an expert in that category as well.
Yeah, thanks. I had coaches collegiately that taught us that to be successful, we didn't have to run complicated strategies, and doing the right thing, simple, but repeatable, and something that could be done over and over again successfully after being practiced was effective. And I also was taught how data could be used to be successful because our defensive coordinator and coach at the time would do regression analysis on probabilities of yard position on the field. And so we knew tendencies like nobody else. And I just was amazed by all of that. And it allowed us to trust when he was putting us into defensive formations based on down and distance, what we knew the tendencies were of the offensive team we were competing against. And so it gives you a lot of confidence because we knew the probabilities of what they were going to run. So you could anticipate through the practices and prep that we were going to be successful against that formation, where they were located on the field and all that.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's one of the first times I've heard regression analysis used in sports, but it makes sense. You also went on and you were a high school coach for many years. And you said something to me before. You said, related to what we're talking about today, when you just need to know when to start over. When's the best choice? And you said in your high school career as a coach, every year you were starting over. New players, new dynamics.
Yeah, you always had a new group that started in the late summer and you were having to see what talent you had, how it was different from previous years, and were you going to have to change anything in terms of your approach because of the talent that you had? And also just different people, you had to provide different incentives and use creativity to bring them together as a team to allow them to be successful. And that was the goal of, as a coach, you don't get to play anymore. You have to put your players in a position to succeed and be successful. And I always saw that as a challenge and an opportunity, and also a growth opportunity as you're investing into young men to just grow. And fortunately, we understood that not many of them were going to be able to play collegiately or even professionally. So we were really trying to build character in them to be successful as young men moving forward in their personal lives.
Let's relate this back to, because you've adopted a lot of that team culture and objectives into the teams even today that you run. And you're a vice president of both technology and sales. So I'm just going to ask you the question. Why did you want to pick this topic, knowing when to start over?
It's a great question. And quite honestly, I think professionally, we sometimes get routinized into our processes and don't ever step back to think that, hey, is there a different way in healthcare in terms of the way procedures are performed? And certainly things have changed over time as the technology has changed, but not necessarily as fast as it's starting to change concurrently. And I also worked in food manufacturing, and we sometimes would get caught where things weren't performing on the line like they used to. And unless we step back to really reassess what's happened, what has changed, what's causing us to have the problems that we're having now, we would never improve the quality of the product that was coming off the line. We would end up drifting into mediocrity. So you basically sometimes have to step away and reevaluate and say, what can we do differently? And it's not you as the leader coming up with a solution, but it's facilitating the team looking at and evaluating and coming up with the ideas of how can we change what we're doing to be better, at least in my opinion.
So you had mentioned the words before, status quo. Yeah, we get in love with our own, kind of our status quo. We get a comfort factor. Change is a hard thing. Change provides friction in our life, and it's trauma in a lot of ways. When do you know when to start over? What's the tipping point?
I think honestly, it comes down to when you're beginning to lose ground, when you're beginning to either lose market share, when you're beginning to underperform, when you're beginning to see a compromise in the delivery of results that you were seeing differently a year ago, or even if you're seeing your competition succeeding better than what you're being able to deliver and do. And I think that, again, we create this idea, at least I observe often that we create this idea that it's safe to just keep doing the same thing over and over again, no matter what, because that's the way it was done before. And that's the way we're going to do it now. And quite honestly, I think that might allow you to have a okay and adequate career or adequate professional life, but it's not going to allow you to be achieve something that's really, at least from my standpoint, personally satisfying. And I've fortunately worked for people who have been willing to say, I don't know if that's going to work or not, but why don't you try it and let's see what happens. And I think that the other piece of that puzzle in my mind, and I always tell folks that I'm leading, okay, what are we going to measure to make sure that we're going to establish, are we continuing to fail, or are we failing worse, or are we actually moving the bar forward? Are we doing something that is worth continuing to try this? And how often are we going to evaluate? And when are we going to either say, no, that is not working and we got to change, or, hey, I think we like the direction we're heading in. Let's actually stay on course and keep trying to invest in this path and process.
We sometimes invest way too much. This is coming from a guy who's a former SaaS founder that raised a number of rounds of funds, and then COVID was not nice to me. And it was really hard to know when it was just failing. We need to say, that's it.
I was leading a sales team pre-COVID, and we got the rug pulled out from under of us. And we were like, what is this Zoom meeting stuff? And how are we going to do that and be effective selling remotely in the absence of having the face-to-face and the dinner meetings and the travel and everything? And all of a sudden, we're like halfway through COVID and we're going, oh, we're still selling. We're still having meetings. We're still being effective. And then as we come out of COVID, we're like, okay, so what do we do now? And we all just said, we aren't going back to what we were doing before, but let's try and figure out the right blend of face-to-face along with the remote meetings, saving some money, not traveling as much. And I think we've found a really strong balance of how we do that and are doing it, I think, much more effective and at a lower price point than we were when we were on the road all the time. And honestly, we're able to touch more people.
Okay, so the last two questions I've asked here, if I go back, you started off by when did you know when to hit the restart button? And you said when you're falling behind, like when you're falling behind your competition. So there's a really wonderful theme that is emerging out of podcast episodes that we're doing and talking to folks like you, which is that technology's role as a competitive advantage for the business. So you started talking about when you're falling behind your competitors. And you've got this wonderful perspective of sales. If there's anybody that understands the competitive advantages of a company, it's the sales team. You have to live that. You have to breathe that every single day. So I want to divert over to a side question here, which I think could be one of the most important on the podcast, which is A, do you believe that a company's technology, specifically the network that runs the data, like you were talking about regression analysis data, how important it was to the football team, data in digital transformation is like Deloitte's of the difference between the business of today and the business of tomorrow. The technology, the network that runs on, from a competitive standpoint, externally, as well as internally, how important is that? If you could say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to put you on the spot here. 1, technology and the competitive advantage we have in our business. It means nothing. It's a 1. 10, it's like vital to creating and perpetuating the competitive advantage that we have in this business. Where would you put it?
I think technology is easily 9 or 10. Easily 9 or 10 on the priority in terms of technology supports how we communicate. Technology supports the delivery of efficient, quality, high leveraged services. And quite honestly, if technology wasn't working right now effectively, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation. If there was a lag in our connectivity, if the videos weren't working, if the voice wasn't recording effectively. And you think about that over and over again, everyone leveraging all the people on Teams calls, Zoom calls, the amount of just information exchanging across our networks and how it's being done securely and effectively every day over and over again, along with just the other elements that are transferred to deliver services in whatever industry it is. And it's highly important in healthcare, which is the space I work in right now. We can't take it for granted. We protect our ability to be connected, to be secure, to meet our obligations as a healthcare organization as it relates to patient information and using it for the right reasons. And technology is high profile, very important, and a must have in what we're doing.
So here's an interesting question, and it doesn't have to be from your leadership because I don't want you to put it on the spot there. But do you feel like in general, in companies that you've worked with, other peers that you've talked to, that leadership has that same perspective, like the importance of the technology? Because that kind of goes to the mentality of the resources that we have and they're available to us.
I think I've been fortunate that in my professional walk and life and career that, I've worked for people who have been willing to invest in technology when I've asked them to, and worked in an academic setting in the early 1980s. And the department that I went in to lead for the first time. They never had an administrator. I said, this is what I need. And one of that was an Exchange server to be able to create the ability for emails to be populated across our departments so we could communicate and share things. And that was the first Exchange server that was installed at this academic center at the time. And I was not running the largest department at the time. So it was like hey, we'll give this guy a try and see what we do. And so I had to hire a network administrator and do all that. And we stood it up and everyone said, oh, wow, okay, that was pretty cool. And so that just, again, promulgated expansion and other things like that. And in terms of just I could spend the whole afternoon talking to you about other examples of where we've leveraged technology during my career to run manufacturing lines more efficiently, better communication, as well as some tools we use today to sell and prospect potential clients for our services now. We leverage AI foundational modeling that's built into some of the tools that we use that help us understand who's hitting our website, and we can understand from where does that interest originate from. We won't know at the person level, but we know at the organizational level who's hitting our website and hitting our contact page and looking us up. And then we can use other means to mine into that organization and reach out and see if we can connect. It's really amazing even in the sales world, what's available to us now.
So let me ask, because investment in technology is important. And one of the biggest things that's happening in like network technology is this wireless first. Everybody's talking about wireless first. And so I wanted to ask your opinion about that, because there's more and more, we're living in an environment where our network, it's a multi-location setup, and it's not always in big urban areas. Healthcare is a perfect example of that. Healthcare happens everywhere. So this idea of wireless first and how the importance to a multi-location rural urban environment, and then getting investment or buy-in from the organization. But I'll just ask you, like, what's your thoughts on this wireless first kind of trend that we're under, or we're right in the middle of?
Yeah, I think it's going to become more prominent. And through my current role, I have access to information to understand that there are people out there that are really working quite diligently to affect a change. In the continental 48 states, we have dead zones where healthcare communication is challenged. We have practices in remote parts of Alaska that there's one T1 line between major connection points that got cut, and it was cut this past fall, and it's not going to get repaired until this summer. And this is without alternative mechanisms like satellite, radar, and other means. We would have gone back to the dark ages. And quite honestly, in healthcare nowadays, cyber risk and cyber attacks are occurring at such a high level of frequency where people are attacking healthcare organizations, hospitals, and trying to put them up for ransom is crazy. And so we all need to be diligent in how we protect, and not only our connectivity, but just access to data. And because without connectivity, you can't deliver healthcare services at a level of that standard of care.
It seems like having a T1 line card. Oh my goodness. And without satellite these days and everything you're talking about, it's like we can't get enough ISPs fitting into our network these days. That then also means part of the technology, like this wireless first, I think is what you're talking about, satellites, wireless first radar cell, like the technology that we need on our network has to be super effective at taking all those ISPs, providing redundancy, failover mechanisms so that we don't even see it. We don't even think about it.
We don't think about it, but that's the problem, is that we take it for granted. And this wireless first concept requires an investment in terms of an infrastructure to make it happen. And the 5G, which was 3G, 4G, 5G now, and even going up higher, there still need to be transmission points. And those transmission points have to occur at certain intervals. And quite honestly, if you even go into Northwest, like Washington State, there are areas in Washington state that you don't get 5G because of transmission points, and they're so remote, yet there are people living there that need to connect, that need to have healthcare, that need to be able to communicate with relatives and other people, and that they have bandwidth challenges to be able to do that effectively because of just the limitations that exist right now. And you could multiply that all across the world. It's just not here in the United States. It's something that hopefully we can address in a way that through the deployment of low-level satellites and other things that can create the ability to lay over the world these networks that we can use for communication.
You may be a little homesick there. I'm from Washington State in Western Washington, and Seattle, kind of family all the way up north there. But one of the things I wanted to ask is, then how important is it in your job now, in your technology role for the network, the infrastructure that you talk about, the technology that is going to take all these different ISPs and all these different options? And when one's working, I talk to companies all the time that talk about, we just have a whole bunch of different pipes. We've got a number of cellular providers, and sometimes it's one day this one's working well and one day this one's better. And one day they're both not working well. And I've got to roll over to satellite, and I have to have an infrastructure that handles all of that. Is the world of technology, have we caught up to that kind of a wireless, that kind of non-linear connected world? Do we have the technology today to handle it and handle that well?
I've seen it still fail where we're at today, unfortunately. And even with duplicity and backups and backup over your backup and proper preventive maintenance and everything else, things just happen sometimes. But I do believe that our networks are becoming more dependable and accessing and creating greater access than what existed 5 years ago, 3 years ago. And so I can only see it getting better. And knowing some things, I know they're the right people making the right investments in creating things that would rival what Starlink is. So as that happens, that makes things more affordable because there's more competition, more access, and people can get to use that.
I want to talk another hour, but I've got one last question because we've talked about a lot here. If there was one single most important thing that you wanted people to take away from today's podcast episode, what would that be?
And again, I'm at the end of my professional life, being in my early 60s. If I would have learned earlier to step back and evaluate with my teams how we were doing things, both when they were going well, to make sure that there isn't a better way or an alternative. Have we seen anything that could make this even better? As well as when you begin to see a degradation in your outputs, in the product that you're delivering or the level of service you're providing, be willing to take your team and step back and go, hey, what's going on? What are we doing? What can we change? What's happened in our process? Has someone changed on the team? What is it that's causing us to not be performing at the level we used to be performing at? And being willing to do that and do that collectively rather than as a young professional, I was like, I've got to fix this. This is my responsibility to fix. And no, it was my job to lead the team to figure out a way to fix it and to give them the resources to do that. And my message and encouragement to anyone who hears this is be willing to take a step back, work with your team, lead them through a process of evaluating, do we like where we're at? Can we do things better? If so, what will it take to do better? What kind of investment resources and our training? And I think that continuous assessment of how are we doing? Are we comfortable? Do we feel we're leaving anything on the table that we could maybe do differently to improve what we're doing? So that would be my encouragement.
Scott, I know one thing for sure is people are going to have questions. Would it be appropriate if I gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile?
Anytime. Yeah, I'd love to network and help, and it only require them time and nothing more. Happy to connect and talk to anybody.
Thank you. The mission of this podcast is to bring so many different perspectives together, specifically from a technology perspective, but we're hearing more and more that if it's team, it's process, and it's technology, that if we don't have the people right, it doesn't matter the process of the technology. We have to get the people down. And you put such an emphasis on that today. Obviously, all three are extraordinarily important, but we need to talk about all three, and we're doing that. And thanks for pushing that forward today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you bet. Team stands as an acronym for Together Everyone Achieves More. And I really believe that. I've always had this vision of encouraging my team, hey, let's lock arms. And when we do that, we can take on anything and hang on strong, because we don't need anyone feeling they need to jump off the process. So
fantastic. Well, Scott, I'm looking forward to having this episode come out and maybe even having you come back, because we had such a great conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. Enjoyed it.